When Keanu Reeves steps onto the set of Voices in Debate, the audience braces for another deep, thoughtful conversation. But James Holloway isn't here for thoughtful. He's here for confrontation. Known for breaking his guests down with sharp provocations, Holloway sees Keanu's silver cross necklace as an opportunity, a symbol to dissect, a belief to challenge. Yet, as Keanu settles into his seat, something shifts. The power dynamic feels certain. Holloway leans in, ready to strike. But what he doesn't know is that by the end of this interview, it won't be Keanu struggling for words. It will be him. And the world will be watching. Before we continue this story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy stories like this, subscribe to the channel because tomorrow we have another special story for you. The studio buzzed with energy. Bright lights illuminated the sleek, modern stage adorned with LED panels that flickered in shades of blue and gold, reflecting the sophisticated identity of the show. The audience murmured in anticipation, eager for what was to come. Voices in Debate was a renowned talk show celebrated for its sharp approach and its host, a man whose reputation for challenging his guests made him both fascinating and intimidating. At the center of the stage, James Holloway adjusted his tie with a subtle smile. Tall, with carefully styled silver hair and piercing eyes, he was a master of provocation. His specialty was pushing his guests beyond their comfort zones, drawing out truths they might have preferred to leave hidden. The show's opening theme played through the speakers, and applause erupted throughout the studio. The camera zoomed in on Holloway as he spread his arms in a practiced theatrical gesture. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Voices in Debate. His voice was rich with confidence, commanding the space effortlessly. The show where we explore truths, deconstruct narratives, and put great minds to the test. The audience responded with enthusiastic applause. Each week, Voices in Debate brought in influential figures, politicians, intellectuals, and celebrities, and challenged them in conversations that often made headlines the next day. But tonight's guest carried a special weight. He wasn't a controversial politician or a scandal-ridden star. He was an icon, beloved, respected, yet shrouded in mystery. Holloway let the suspense linger before continuing. Our guest tonight is one of the most recognizable faces in Hollywood, a legendary actor admired for his humility and humanity, yet someone who remains intriguingly private. He rarely shares more than necessary, but tonight we aim to go beyond the surface. Ladies and gentlemen, Keanu Reeves. The audience erupted in applause, some even rising to their feet in admiration. The camera shifted to the side of the stage as a dark curtain slowly parted. Keanu emerged with his signature composed stride and an air of quiet presence, dressed in a sleek black suit without a tie. His shoulder-length hair framed his face, and against the darkness of his attire, a silver cross necklace gleamed under the studio lights. He acknowledged the audience with a small, reserved smile before taking a seat opposite Holloway. He crossed his legs in a relaxed posture, seemingly unfazed by the weight of expectation that filled the room. "Keanu Reeves," Holloway said, leaning slightly forward, his gaze sharp and attentive. "It's a pleasure to have you here." "The pleasure is mine, James," Keanu replied, his voice calm yet steady. The host studied his guest for a brief moment, like a chess player contemplating his first move. "You have a reputation for being one of the nicest guys in Hollywood, a real enigma. Always kind, always discreet, never caught up in scandal. But honestly, Keanu, I believe there's much more to you than people realize." Keanu gave a small, knowing smile, tilting his head slightly. "I think we all have more layers than we show the world." "No doubt," Holloway agreed, narrowing his eyes slightly. "And that's exactly what we're here to explore." A brief pause followed, calculated and deliberate. Then Holloway's gaze flicked subtly to the silver cross resting against Keanu's chest. "Now tell me," he gestured lightly toward the necklace. "You've never been particularly outspoken about religion or faith, but here you are, wearing a very visible Christian symbol." Keanu's expression remained serene, though his fingers instinctively brushed against the cross, an unconscious habit. The studio lights flickered softly as the show returned from the commercial break. The audience, still murmuring in anticipation, was eager for what would come next. The Voices in Debate logo glowed behind the stage, while James Holloway settled into his seat, wearing a smug smile and the piercing gaze of a man who believed he was in control. This was his favorite part, the moment he dismantled his guests, stripped away their defenses, and forced them into uncomfortable territory. "All right, we're back," he announced, twirling a pen between his fingers in an almost dismissive manner. Then his eyes locked onto Keanu, like a predator studying its prey. "Before the break, I asked you a simple question, Keanu. What does that necklace mean to you?" The audience fell into silence. Some leaned forward in their seats, eager to see how Keanu would handle the pressure. Keanu's fingers brushed against the silver cross, rolling it gently between them. His expression was calm, his demeanor unreadable. "This necklace," he glanced at it as if weighing his words carefully. "It has personal meaning to me." Holloway arched a brow, then let out a short, scoffing laugh. "Personal?" he echoed mockingly. "Oh, come on, Keanu. You're a public figure. Everything you wear, everything you display, sends a message." Keanu remained composed, but Holloway could sense the tension brewing beneath his stillness. The host leaned forward slightly, his tone dripping with condescension. "And let's be real here." He gestured toward the cross. "It's 2025. The world has changed. People have changed. And yet here you are." He pointed directly at the necklace, wearing an archaic symbol. The provocation was blatant. The audience stiffened, sensing the sharpness in his words. Keanu's gaze remained steady. "Archaic." Holloway smirked, deliberately twisting the knife deeper. "Yes, archaic. Religion, faith, belief in unseen forces." He waved his hand dismissively. "I'm not a religious man, Keanu. I believe in reason and progress. And frankly, I find it surprising that someone like you, modern, progressive, intelligent, would still cling to something so outdated." He chuckled softly, shaking his head as if Keanu were a child who hadn't yet outgrown fairy tales. "Look, I get it when simple-minded people without access to knowledge, hold on to faith. But you—" Holloway raised a brow, eyes gleaming with superiority. "You've traveled the world. You've seen different cultures. I expected better." It was an insult disguised as intellectual superiority. Some in the audience laughed nervously at Holloway's audacity, while others seemed uncomfortable. Keanu, however, did not react. He didn't flinch. He didn't avert his gaze. He didn't shrink under the weight of Holloway's words. He simply looked at the host with a quiet, unshaken intensity. Then at last he spoke. "Interesting, James." His voice was steady, carrying an undertone of quiet strength. "You talk as if faith and intelligence are mutually exclusive." Holloway snorted, shaking his head. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Let's be honest here. How many wars have been fought in the name of that cross you're wearing? How many people have been persecuted, killed, condemned because of that symbol?" Keanu ran his thumb over the pendant, his gaze steady. "Do you want to debate history, or do you want to debate my necklace?" The audience reacted audibly, an impressed "ooh" rippling through the crowd. Holloway's eyes narrowed slightly. He wasn't used to being called out so directly. He forced a chuckle, but his fingers tensed slightly on the armrest of his chair. "Fair enough." His tone was sharper now. "Let's make it simpler then. Are you wearing that cross as a statement, as a declaration to the world?" It was a trap. If Keanu said yes, Holloway could accuse him of pushing a religious agenda. If he said no, he would seem hypocritical for displaying a symbol without standing by it. But once again, Keanu did not fall for it. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying the host. Then he spoke. "Are you wearing that expensive watch on your wrist as a statement, James? As a declaration to the world?" A pause. A second too long. The audience laughed. Keanu had flipped the conversation effortlessly. Holloway's jaw tightened for a fraction of a second. The show host was no stranger to heated debates, but this was different. Keanu wasn't getting defensive. He wasn't reacting with frustration or aggression. He was turning Holloway's own tactics against him, and the audience was starting to notice. But Holloway wasn't about to let control slip away. He leaned forward, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. "All right, Keanu. Let's be blunt. In a world of science, evolution, and technology, Do you really believe that symbol on your chest still has a place? The provocation was no longer subtle. It was a direct challenge. The audience held its breath. Keanu's lips parted, ready to respond, and just as he was about to speak, the show's theme music played. A commercial break. Holloway grinned triumphantly, turning to the camera. "We'll be right back, folks. But trust me, this conversation is far from over." The show's theme music played again, and the studio was illuminated with a subtle light shift as the show returned from its commercial break. James Holloway adjusted his tie and clasped his hands together, wearing a smug smile. He believed he had backed Keanu into a corner. "We're back, ladies and gentlemen." His voice carried the satisfaction of someone who thought they had already won the debate. He turned to the camera, making sure to hold his audience. "Before the break, we left a question in the air, one that I think we all want answered. In a world of science, technology, and evolution, does that symbol still have a place?" He turned to Keanu, eyes sharp, waiting for hesitation, waiting for him to stumble. But Keanu Reeves did not hesitate. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, calm, steady, with an almost unreadable glint in his eyes. "James, if you don't mind, may I ask you a question?" Holloway blinked, caught off guard by the sudden role reversal. "Oh, by all means." He grinned, though there was a hint of mockery in his tone. Keanu studied him for a moment, then spoke. "What do you believe evolution is?" Holloway squinted slightly, as if trying to detect a trap. "Oh, come on, Keanu. Evolution is progress. It's growth. It's about leaving behind outdated beliefs and advancing toward a world driven by reason." Keanu nodded slowly, as if considering the answer. "So, to you, evolving means abandoning anything that can't be measured in a lab?" Holloway chuckled dryly. "Well," he spread his hands, "if something can't be proven, then it's just an idea, right?" Keanu held his gaze, patient but unshakable. "And love, James? Can you measure love?" The audience murmured. A few people crossed their arms, intrigued by the turn in conversation. Holloway scoffed, but there was a slight edge of nervousness now. "I'm not sure I follow." Keanu's voice remained steady. "Does love exist, James?" Holloway exhaled sharply. "Of course it does. But have you ever scientifically proven it? Have you ever held love in your hands, placed it under a microscope?" The silence in the studio was deafening. Holloway's expression shifted for the briefest moment. He realized where Keanu was leading him. "Oh, no, no, no." Holloway waved a hand, laughing without humor. "You are not going to compare religion to love." "I'm not comparing them." Keanu's eyes held firm. "I'm asking you, if something can't be scientifically proven, does that mean it has no value?" The audience held its breath. Holloway blinked, momentarily thrown off course. Keanu did not raise his voice. He did not change his expression, but his words carried a weight that filled the studio. "James, you talk about faith as if it's a chain that binds people. But what if, for some, it's a bridge? What if, for me, this cross is not about control but about freedom?" Holloway opened his mouth to counter, but Keanu continued before he could interrupt. "You brought up wars, persecution. Yes, religion has been misused, twisted into something harmful by people in power. But that doesn't erase the fact that, for millions, it has also been a refuge, a light in the darkness. I wear this cross not as a statement of superiority or control, but as a reminder." Holloway's lips pressed into a thin line. Keanu looked directly at him. "A reminder of humility, of compassion, a reminder that the world does not revolve around me." The silence stretched. Then Keanu tilted his head slightly. "What about you, James?" Holloway frowned. "What about me?" Keanu's voice remained soft, yet the question hit with the force of a hammer. "Do you believe in anything greater than yourself?" The audience grew even quieter. The question landed like a punch. Holloway tensed just slightly, but enough for the cameras to catch it. He inhaled, composing himself. "We're not here to talk about me." Keanu offered a small, knowing smile. "Maybe we should be." The host's eyes darkened. Keanu leaned back in his chair. Because when someone reacts with such hostility toward a symbol, it usually means there's something about it that unsettles them. Holloway's jaw clenched for the first time that night. James Holloway was on the defensive, and the audience noticed. The studio was silent. The audience was entirely absorbed in the verbal battle unfolding before them. James Holloway was comfortable. He knew that for the first time in a long time, he was not in control of the conversation, and that infuriated him. He took a slow breath, leaning back in his chair, trying to regain his composure. But his eyes now held a dangerous glint. He couldn't afford to lose this debate. "All right, Keanu." Holloway forced a smile, but now there was undeniable venom in his tone. "You've spoken eloquently about humility, about compassion, about how the cross represents freedom, not control." Then he leaned forward, his stare piercing. "But tell me this. What about all the people who have suffered under that very symbol? What about those who were judged, condemned, and divided in its name? You wear that cross on your chest, but do you understand the weight it carries?" The audience held its breath. Keanu didn't flinch. He didn't shift in his seat. Instead, he smiled faintly. "You talk as if the symbol itself is to blame." Holloway narrowed his eyes. "Isn't it?" Keanu exhaled slowly, his fingers once again brushing over the silver cross. "If one person uses a hammer to build a home, and another person uses the same hammer to break windows, is it the hammer's fault or the person holding it?" The audience murmured, visibly impressed. Holloway's expression darkened. "That's a convenient metaphor, Keanu." He shook his head. "But we're talking about reality, about history. Christianity, religion, they've been responsible for countless wars, oppression, and discrimination. People have suffered in its name, and yet you sit here, wearing that cross like it's just a decoration." Keanu did not react. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, studying Holloway. Then he asked, "James, do you believe in justice?" Holloway frowned. "Of course I do." Keanu nodded thoughtfully. "And yet, how many injustices have been committed in the name of justice?" A pause. The audience stirred. Holloway blinked. "What are you getting at?" Keanu's voice remained measured, steady, unwavering. "People have done terrible things in the name of justice, but that doesn't mean justice itself is evil. It means people can corrupt even the purest ideals." He let that sink in before continuing. "The same goes for faith." Holloway's jaw tightened. Keanu leaned forward slightly, his gaze unwavering. "If people have used faith as a weapon, that's not a failure of faith. It's a failure of those people. You blame the cross, but you ignore the hands that held it." The audience let out a hushed collective murmur. Keanu's words landed like a strike of thunder. Holloway forced a laugh. "So you're saying faith is innocent? That religion bears no responsibility for the damage it has caused?" Keanu shook his head. "I'm saying faith is like fire. It can warm a home or it can burn it down. But fire itself is neither good nor evil. It depends on how people use it." Another pause. Holloway clenched his jaw. He could feel the tide turning against him. For the first time, he didn't have a sharp rebuttal. Keanu watched him carefully, then softly he said, "Maybe the real question isn't about what faith has done. Maybe the real question is, why does it bother you so much?" A director hit the audience stiffened. Holloway's expression faltered just for a second. "Excuse me." Keanu didn't break eye contact. "You keep attacking faith, James. But have you ever asked yourself why? Why does the idea of belief make you so uncomfortable?" The studio was dead silent. For the first time all night, James Holloway was on the defensive, and the audience noticed. The silence in the studio was unlike anything before, heavy charged, one that settled thick in the air, almost suffocating. James Holloway, the man who had built his career by dominating conversations, was now on the defensive, and he despised it. Keanu Reeves had flipped the narrative. The audience could feel it. Holloway could feel it. But he wasn't about to admit it. He forced a chuckle, straightened his tie, and leaned back slightly in his chair as if to create the illusion of control. "You're clever, Keanu. I'll give you that." His voice was even, but his fingers gripped the armrest just a little too tightly, turning the question back on me. "Nice move, but let's not pretend this is about me." Keanu's face remained unreadable, his presence still composed, as if he had all the time in the world. Isn't it, though? Holloway scoffed, shaking his head. I'm not the one sitting here, wearing a religious symbol. I'm not the one promoting a belief system in front of millions of people. Keanu raised an eyebrow. Promoting. Holloway gestured toward the cross hanging from Keanu's neck. Call it what you want, but when someone like you, an influential public figure, walks onto a stage wearing something like that, it sends a message. Whether you admit it or not, you're endorsing something. Keanu tilted his head slightly. So, if someone wears a rainbow flag, are they endorsing something? The audience shifted. It was a simple question, but its weight settled over the room. Holloway hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Too brief for most to notice, but Keanu noticed. Well, Holloway recovered quickly. That's different. A rainbow flag represents inclusivity, equality. And you don't think faith can? Keanu's voice was steady, his words clear and deliberate. The audience leaned in. Holloway's jaw tightened. Faith has been used to exclude people. People like Keanu, to justify hate. You can't deny that. Keanu nodded slowly. And so have governments. So have ideologies. So has science. Nearly every belief system in history has been weaponized at some point. Yet we don't erase them entirely. We refine them. We learn. We grow. So why is faith the only thing you think should be erased? The tension deepened. The audience felt a shift. James Holloway was losing ground. And for the first time tonight, he knew it. He needed to take back control. All right, let's skip the philosophy and get real here. He leaned forward, his voice sharpening. Do you really believe in this modern world, with all the knowledge, all the advancements we've made, that people still need faith? Keanu didn't hesitate. Yes. A simple, firm answer. Holloway's eyes narrowed. Why? Keanu took a slow breath, choosing his words carefully. Because logic alone doesn't fulfill the human soul. The audience stilled. Keanu continued, his voice calm yet unshakable. We live in an age of information. We can explain the stars, cure diseases, connect with anyone, anywhere, in an instant. But people are lonelier than ever. More anxious. More lost. The answers we found don't replace the meaning we seek. Holloway leaned back slightly, his face unreadable. So you're saying faith gives people meaning? Keanu nodded. For some, yes. For me, yes. And I think that's something worth respecting, even if it's not for you. Holloway exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Respecting? That's an interesting word, because some would argue that religion has done more harm than good. Keanu didn't argue. He acknowledged it. Some would. Holloway's eyes lit up. He sensed an opening. And what do you say to them? Keanu's gaze didn't waver. His response was quiet, measured. I'd say pain isn't exclusive to faith. Humans are flawed, James. We make mistakes. We correct things. But if we only focus on what was done wrong, we ignore what was done right. The love, the hope, the kindness that has also come from faith, from people who live by its true meaning, not by its distortion. The studio was dead silent. For the first time, Holloway had nothing to say. His lips pressed into a thin line. The moment stretched, and the audience knew it. James Holloway was out of angles. For the first time in a long time, he had no comeback. He had lost. The weight of silence in the studio was unlike anything before. James Holloway, once the commanding force of every conversation, now sat across from Keanu Reeves, visibly outmaneuvered. For the first time in his career, he had nothing to say, and the audience felt it. A slow realization spread through the room. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a shift. Keanu remained still, composed, his presence steady like an anchor in the middle of a storm. Then a sound broke through the silence. It was soft at first, a single clap, then another, and then an eruption of applause. The audience rose to their feet, an unexpected standing ovation shaking the studio. Keanu's words had resonated. His calmness, his ability to navigate through every provocation, had left him speechless. James Holloway, still seated, still reeling, glanced toward the cameras. He could see the headlines forming in real time. He had lost, and he knew it. Holloway forced a thin smile, his ego fighting to maintain some semblance of control. "Well, Keanu," he said, clearing his throat, "I have to admit, I didn't expect this conversation to go in this direction." Keanu's eyes remained calm, understanding, but not forgiving. Conversations have a way of revealing more than we plan. James Holloway's fingers tapped against his chair, a nervous tick. "That they do." He chuckled lightly, but there was no amusement in his eyes. "I suppose this is the part where I thank you for your insights and your time." Keanu nodded. "It's been a pleasure." The way he said it, genuine yet firm, made it clear this wasn't a victory Keanu had sought, but it was a victory nonetheless. The world was watching. Within minutes of the episode airing, clips from the conversation flooded social media. Keanu Reeves' name dominated the trending lists. Memes, reaction videos, and threads analyzing every moment of the debate spread like wildfire. But beyond the usual internet buzz, something felt different this time. This wasn't just another viral moment. It was a shift in perception. James Holloway sat alone in his dressing room, watching the aftermath unfold. The interview was everywhere. News outlets dissected it. Talk shows replayed clips. Commentators weighed in. Some called it the night Holloway met his match. Others labeled it the most important conversation of the year. Holloway clenched his jaw as he scrolled through Twitter. #KeanuWins was the top trend. Critics, celebrities, and even public figures were praising Keanu's calm, unwavering responses. But the worst part? It wasn't just that Keanu had stood his ground. It was that Holloway had been exposed. His usual tactics, the sharp provocations, the calculated condescension, the relentless need to corner his guests, had failed. And everyone saw it. For the first time in his career, James Holloway was not the one controlling the conversation, and he hated it. Meanwhile, Keanu Reeves left the studio without a word. No grand victory speeches, no gloating, no interviews. He simply nodded to the crew, shook a few hands, and walked away. Reporters swarmed outside, microphones raised, shouting questions. "Keanu, how do you feel about the interview? Do you think Holloway was unfair? What message were you trying to send?" Keanu didn't answer. Instead, he smiled softly, got into a car, and disappeared into the night. His silence spoke louder than any response could. Days later, Keanu finally broke his silence with a single post on social media. No long statements, no explanations. Just a simple message. We don't have to agree to respect each other. We don't have to believe the same things to walk the same path. The post exploded. It wasn't about religion. It wasn't about winning. It was about understanding. And that was why Keanu had won. Because in the end, it wasn't about the argument. It was about the conversation. If you enjoyed this story, we have many more that will warm your heart. Click the screen to explore more stories of hope, compassion, and resilience.